Hi! Welcome to the video portion of this lesson. As promised, if I'm going to make you do one, I'm going to do one myself. So this is going to be the lecture. We're going to do it in Part A and Part B, and this goes with Unit 3, Lesson 6. Part A is going to be Chapter 11, which is on working with children with disabilities. Because in the Early Childhood Associate's degree at OTC, there's an entire class, the Young Exceptional Child, which is ECD 330. We are not going to spend an inordinate amount of time on special needs. We're going to look at just 3 main points from this chapter, and this is not going to be something you're going to be heavily tested over. We won't be focusing our assignments in our journal and discussion on this. We're going to look more at the mental health chapter, which is chapter 12, which will be the lecture part B. So real quickly, I want to run down just a couple of things that I would like for you guys to know about being an inclusive center or an inclusive classroom, working with children with special needs. The book gives 3 points to why teachers need to be the best teachers they can be for children with special needs. And there are 3 things that they say on page 351 that really are key, and that is that we need to be capable and willing, adaptable and able, and reflective and responsive. What they're meaning by this is that we're capable and willing to take a child with special needs in our class. We're going to look at that child as we would any child, that they have value and they're wonderful and there are things to love and enjoy about them. And having them in our class is going to mean being willing and accepting of them. Making an environment where they can thrive, an environment where they're loved and cared for. So we're going to be open to the possibility of being an inclusive environment. Being adaptable and able means we're going to learn what we need to learn about that child through their family, through any assessments we have access to, developmental milestones that they have hit or missed. We're going to learn that child. When we learn that child, then we can adapt our environment to make them thrive and be successful as we would any other child. We can make it safer for them. We can challenge them appropriately without challenging them to the point of frustration. And then we're going to reflect on that. Like we do at the end of any lesson, we look back and say, this worked, this didn't work, I want to try this again, oh, I really want to change that before I do it again. We're going to reflect at those things that we do with the children that have special needs in our classroom. And we're going to say this was successful or this wasn't, or he really needs more of this, or she needs less of that. And then we're going to change that environment to make them successful. A couple of reasons that I think you're going to see children with special needs in your classroom is it's no longer if we have a child with special needs in our classroom, it's when and what type. With the increase of health issues, with the increase of diabetes, we're going to have special needs children that are due to medical issues. We know in recent years there's been a huge increase in the number of children that are being diagnosed with autism. A, we're able to diagnose them better, and B, there are just more. We also know that attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are on the rise. So we are going to see children in our classroom that are functioning with these challenges as well. So what do we need to know? What do we need to do to make that the best environment for them? If we're going to be a truly inclusive center, then our practices have to ensure that those children have equal access to the best education. A law was passed, and we call it IDEA, I-D-E-A, that says that each child gets access to education. If they have special needs, then they get access that supports and helps them overcome or maximize their potential within what they can do. And then we know that we can write an IEP or an individual education plan for that child, or their therapist does, and we help support it. So we're there to support inclusion, we're there to support the child, and really create an atmosphere where they can thrive. Why is this important? Well, it's important for that child so that they can function to the fullness of their abilities. It's also important for the children that we have in our class that are so-called normal functioning children. I want to tell you a story. One of my early times of being a brave, my teachers thought stupid director, and really jumping out on a limb and taking some children with special needs. we decided that we were going to look into being an inclusive center. We opened it up to enrolling children with various special needs. And we had a child that came to us who was not mobile, they were not verbal, and they were not going to be mobile or verbal. Their disability was such that they were going to hit a peak of performance and then decrease. But the parents wanted them to be in an enriched, invigorating environment with other children. They wanted them to experience social interaction and be exposed to music and activity, even if they couldn't physically participate in it. So the child came to us to be there to visually watch and be surrounded by movement and activity. In order not to overwhelm her, her first weeks were going to be spent moving between being able to lie on her belly on her mat and watch, or sitting for short periods of time. Sitting was very hard for her and frustrated her. So they brought her in and they laid her on her mat, not knowing whether she would be overwhelmed or not. She immediately responded to the environment, pushed up on her elbows and looked around and watched, and she propped herself up, on her arms like an infant would, and watched the activity around her. The other amazing thing that happened, little Robert, that's not his real name, came running from across the room. He's 2 years old. He sees little Lily, and that's not her real name, laying there, runs to her, lays on his belly, faces his head towards her head, and begins to talk to her. How did he know that that was the best way to interact with her? He just did. He became her protector, her best friend. He explained everything to her in a 2-year-old fashion. He read picture books to her. And then another little guy in the class decided that he was her special best friend or boyfriend. And when they got older, he wanted to be the one to help push her wheelchair and make sure she had her bib and make sure her cup was where she could reach it. And so it was not only great for Lily to experience the classroom and have that social interaction, it was fantastic for the class. They had an understanding and an acceptance of her that I have seen in very few children. So having children with special needs in the class builds compassion, understanding, and knowledge in the children that are interacting with them. The book goes on to go into specifics about a lot of the disorders that we might face in a classroom, some of the causes, some of the things that we need to do. It's very technical, and again, this is going to be covered in the Young Exceptional Child ECD 330, so we're not going to go into great detail here. What you should do is just read through there, see if it applies to children that you care for, if it sparks a certain interest in you, something you want to learn more about. Then use that for future reference, use it for your own knowledge and for creating an environment around a child you may have with that special need. But for the purpose of this class, it's more detailed than what we really have time to cover, and I feel like I would do a disservice to Ms. Datama and some of the other people that teach the Young Exceptional Child to cover it here and then have you cover it again in another class. Another situation where that happens is the ECD 120, the Language and Literacy class. We'll go into detail about some of the speech disorders and some communication issues. For the purpose of what we're doing here, just know that communication disorders fall into 2 basic categories. They deal with receptive language, being able to hear, understand, and build a body of vocabulary by a child. That's their receptive language, and being able to then use that to express their thoughts and ideas and needs and wants. That's their expressive language. So receptive and expressive language, there can be disorders based around those 2 things. Can be due to the formation of their mouth, can be due to a hearing impairment, that they hear things differently. It can be a processing disorder. Their brain tells them something different is going on than what is actually happening. So how do we then communicate with those children with communication disorders? Many of us have probably been exposed to ASL and signed English, and maybe have had some experience with doing baby sign or some of those things, or teaching children songs with actual sign language signs in them to be more inclusive of those types of disorder. If you're looking at children with hearing and vision problems, one of the key things to think about in the classroom is that environment. Is it made physically to where they can navigate through that space safely? Can they hear the alarm go off if there's a fire or a storm siren? What do we do for them if there's a safety concern that would be a safety concern for all children, if they're not mobile or if they have low vision or a hearing issue when we have to relocate to a safer spot? So we're going to look at that greatly in chapter 15, but just be thinking of those children in your care. What do I need to know if we have a drill or if we have an actual event? If you have an intruder drill and you have a child with autism, that being still and quiet or hidden away would be an extremely frustrating and fearful thing for them. How are you going to accommodate them into your classroom? There's some other ideas about classroom management in the chapter. There's a very short list on page 383 that talks about some basic classroom management things that you can do to help children with disorders. I want to pose two of my favorite things to you about working with children and being inclusive and making that classroom strategy fit them. One thing is, I have found and has been supported by research that the blues and greens of the outside world, the green grass and the blue sky, is calming and soothing to all children. With children who are hyperactive or children who have autism, they have been tested and function better in natural environments. So can we get them outside more? Is there a way to do things that are frustrating, tasks that they need to learn, especially if you're teaching in an elementary setting and you have a child in your class that is challenged with attention deficit disorder? Is there a part of the lesson that is extremely frustrating for them that you can take outside? So I would challenge you to look for ways to bring the outdoors to them to where they can function in a calmer manner. And also the idea of using a schedule that's predictable and manageable, flexible but predictable, and having it to where a child can tell what is coming next. Whether it's through verbal cues and warnings for children that don't like change and don't change and make transitions quickly and easily, or a visual schedule for a child that may be autistic and need to refer back to a visual schedule. Look for those classroom management tools that meet the needs of that special needs child that you have. So, my invitation to you is to be brave and take on as much inclusion as your center will allow, or as if you're in charge, if you're the director, as you can manage. Learn about those kids so that you know individually what they need, and so that you're constantly learning and changing the environment to meet their needs. And I will see you back for part B.